Good morning. My name is Jody Miller, and I am the adult programmer at the Central Rappahannock Regional Library, Fredericksburg branch. It is my pleasure today to introduce Mary Bevan from Mary Washington Healthcare Grief Support Services. She will be doing a three-part series this summer called Journey of Grief, Tools for Support and Compassion. And they will all be aired on the second Tuesday of the month of June, July, and August. Today's topic is going to be about supporting grieving teens. I will now turn it over for Mary, our expert.
Thank you, Jody. And thank you all for being here with us this morning or watching later. Today, we are going to be talking specifically about supporting teens. I did a series last summer about books for teens, children, and adults. So if you are interested in learning more about books that you can use while we're talking about some of these themes, you can certainly refer back to those, although I do mention a few books here at the end of this presentation. So we will jump right in. So I'm going to start with this quote. This is by Dr. Alan Wolfelt, who is one of the leading experts in grief care and supporting grieving people. He's written a ton of books. One of them we use as a book for our book study. This book, Companioning the Grieving Child, A Soulful Guide for Caregivers, is specifically about supporting children and teens who are grieving. And I think this quote is a great framework for kind of starting this conversation about supporting teens who have experienced the death of a loved one. So he says, companioning demands observing and bearing witness. As companions, we are not experts who have the answers. We look to the bereaved child to teach us about his grief. We do not control his journey. We simply show up with curiosity and a willingness to learn and listen. And I love his idea of this idea of companioning, kind of walking alongside somebody, whether they are a child, a teen, or an adult, a friend, a family member, an acquaintance, a coworker, whoever it is, and really just being present with the person, bearing witness. So as we're talking about what grief is, how teens experience grief, and what we can do to help, just kind of keep this framework in mind. We don't have to have all the answers. We just need to be present and walk alongside them. So what is grief? We have these two words, and these actually are from Dr. Wolfelt. These are kind of his definitions. So grief refers to a person's reaction to loss comprised of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that change over time. And this is kind of considered the internal experience of the loss. Mourning is the outward expression of grief and is sometimes used to describe the period after the loss. But mourning, we think about, is kind of our these outward expressions. They could be cultural celebrations or remembrances, so like a funeral. They could also be more private in the sense of like you and another person. But it is kind of the sharing of the grief, having a space to talk about and experience those internal grief feelings kind of on the outside. So what is grief? Grief is the normal response to loss. It's not something to be changed or fixed or corrected. It is unique to the individual. And I find this especially true of teens, is that there is no playbook. There's no set of rules or guidelines that says they're going to do this, then they're going to do this, then they're going to do this. So again, kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about some of these typical things that some teens may experience, is that the teens in your life may be doing it differently, and that's okay. And then grief is experienced in different ways over time. And I think especially for kids and teens, it's this re-grieving over the significant events that happen in a person's life. So, if your parent passes away when you're, say, 14 or 15, you're going to experience that grief in different ways when you graduate from high school, when you find your partner and maybe get married or have a child, when you get a promotion at work, like whatever those kind of significant experiences are, We tend to experience grief in a new and different way kind of as we get older. This is also true in our understanding of the grief itself, of the loss, maybe finding out new details about the loss, or just kind of having a deeper understanding of what it means to live your life without this significant person. So we do find that the grief changes and is experienced in new and different ways over time. And again, this is normal. Some factors that impact grief. So the relationship with the deceased, was this a friend? Was it a sibling, a parent? So what was the kind of relationship? The nature of that relationship. Was it a close, loving relationship? Was it a fraught relationship? Was there maybe some discord? I think sometimes teens get a bad rap for, they're going through all their hormonal changes. And sometimes that causes them some friction and some butting heads. So if you have, maybe your parent passes away when you're right in the middle of kind of one of these conflicts, that can be really challenging to navigate because that wasn't the whole relationship, but that's kind of how the relationship was left. And of course, there are certainly examples of a close, loving relationship. Sometimes the relationship is distant. Maybe the person who passed away was incarcerated, or maybe they lived on the other side of the country. Lots of different things. Sorry, my words are covered up there a little bit for this next one. It says circumstances of the death. Was it unexpected? Was it maybe an overdose or a car accident, suicide? Maybe the person had an illness for a while, like cancer or Alzheimer's or something that was kind of a long trajectory. Has the teen experienced other losses? Maybe they had a parent die when they were young, and now they're having a sibling pass away. So obviously that's going to impact the way that they are grieving. Their coping skills. This is something that, we are all kind of raised in family cultures where we are given different coping skills. Sometimes it depends on our personality. Sometimes we have maybe a school counselor or somebody who's teaching us some of these critical skills. But we all kind of have our own type of skills, and some are more adaptive or helpful, and some are more maladaptive. And most of us kind of have a mix of both. And then your support system. We're going to talk a lot more about this later on. But this is one of the biggest single predictors of kind of how well a person will cope after a loss, is the type of support that they have. And then other stressors. Maybe your parent passes away and then you have to go move with your grandparents who live in a different school district, or maybe you and your siblings have to get separated. There's lots of different possibilities. Maybe it's just the stress of having to go back to school after your person passes away, and kind of having to face the realities of getting back in when people are, worried about their grades and what their friends said or whatever. And you're like, my person died. Like, I can't focus on these things. That's very stressful. Teens have an understanding that death is permanent. This is something that in those younger years is evolving. So by the time teens reach those kind of true teenage years, 13, 18, almost all teens have the understanding that death is permanent. Their person's not coming back. But they may have questions about the meaning of life, kind of some of these existential questions that you don't see really in younger ages, that this is something that really comes out during these teen years. Why did this death happen? Why do traumatic events in general happen? And you'll see my citation there at the bottom. And I have a link to the Dougie Center at the end too. They're a great resource for kind of some of these tip sheets, understanding kind of in a snapshot what children and teens may experience, kind of some of these normal things. Some common responses to grief. So oftentimes teens withdraw from family and other supports. And again, this is developmentally appropriate. They are expected to kind of separate from their family during this time, during the teen years. That is a normal part of this growing process, is that kind of seeking that independence. And so you'll see the third one down, focused on connections with peers. Most teens are seeking a lot of their comfort and relief from the grief from their peers. So it might not be talking necessarily like about the person who died, but they are kind of retreating to those peer relationships for their kind of safe place, rather than relying on their family of origin. And again, we are talking kind of generally about many teens, and so not all teens are going to react and interact in the same way. Teens are often uncomfortable discussing the death. They don't want to have these kind of intense sit-down conversations about this really emotionally charged topic. So we'll talk about kind of what to do, how to handle that. But just knowing that that's normal, that if your teen is, they're like, I don't know what to do. They're not talking about it. This is a very common experience, and nothing is kind of wrong with the teen. Unfortunately, we do often see increased risk-taking behaviors. This could be like engaging in drugs and alcohol, maybe like having risky sexual intercourse, driving fast, kind of all those kind of risk-taking behaviors, and inability to concentrate. This obviously is challenging because teens are expected to go back to school, to kind of jump back into life, and sometimes that's really hard when you feel like you have that like brain fog. And you're not really able to concentrate. You're not able to focus on the things that kind of need to be focused on. Difficulty sleeping, changes in appetite. Again, we kind of see this developmentally appropriate, unpredictable, and intense emotions, but this can be exacerbated by the loss itself. We often see a worry about safety of self and others. So like, is the world safe? Am I safe? Are you safe? Are we like, what's going to happen here? And just kind of fixating on those worries, fear another death will happen. Attempts to take on a caregiving or parent role. Obviously, this is more so the case when a parent has passed away and there are younger children in the home. But I've also seen this like maybe it's just like a mom and a son, and the son feels now that he has to kind of like be the man of the house and like take on that role to support the parent who's still living, to kind of do those things that keep life going. And there may be some real that may be a real need, right? You may need to step up and have the child maybe do the laundry a little bit more often, or help with meals, or whatever it is. Maybe you do need help with caregiving. But we just want to be careful about parentifying the child and making them kind of into the parent, because they're not. Teens are still children. Teens may have thoughts of suicide or self-harm. And obviously, if this is the case, you want to seek some additional help, some maybe professional counseling. And then hypervigilance. Teens who have experienced a loss often have this kind of increased sensitivity to noise, movement, and light. Okay, so that's kind of like what we often see teens experience. That's kind of what their lived experience is often when they've experienced this loss. And so now we can talk about what helps. So first, we want to reinforce safety and security. I think a challenge is that teens might not be verbally expressing like, I'm feeling scared now. I'm feeling like my sense of safety has been totally jarred. So sometimes we kind of have to like put it out there into the universe that they are safe, that, there is a plan for, the family's finances, or there is a plan for how they're going to get food on the table if maybe dad passed away and he was the breadwinner. And so just kind of like reassuring them that you as the caregiver or parent have the tools, or you're working on a plan, like they don't need to worry about it, and just kind of reinforcing that they don't need to take on that burden. Maintaining routines. This is something that actually is helpful throughout the whole lifespan, from very young children through old age. That routines really help us when we are in times of stress. And obviously grief is, and losing somebody important to you is a tremendous stress. It really rocks the world around you. So maintaining routines as much as possible, going to school, going to, grandma's house on Sunday for, family dinner, still going to activities, like if you play sports or music or whatever it is, but just doing your best to kind of stay in those routines. This is something that can be really tricky if the person who passed away was kind of a main person who helped with those routines. Maybe they were the person who drove you to your soccer practice, or took you to your band, workshop or rehearsal. So that is like, you may need to find other people to fill in those roles. But as much as possible, trying to stay on those routines. And then allow for expression of feelings without trying to change, fix, or take them away. And this kind of goes back to that quote I read at the beginning of walking alongside somebody with curiosity. So you're not doing anything. You're not the expert. You're not the fixer. You are simply hearing what the teen has to say. And I think, I'll speak as a parent and as a social worker. This is, to me, one of the biggest asks that we have as loving, supportive people in a teen's life, because we love this person. We don't want them to be hurting. We don't want them to be having to deal with these really tricky feelings. We want to fix it. We want to take it away. And so it is a very loving act to kind of do that, to say, oh, it's going to be okay, and, whatever. But the most loving and caring thing we can do is just allowing the teen to have a safe place to express those feelings, whether they are angry or relieved or sad or, frustrated, confused, guilty, like whatever the feeling is, and to just sit with it and to just say, I am here with you, and I'm going to sit here with you in this. And that really is the best, most loving and helpful thing we can do. And that the teens know that they can repeatedly come back. Maybe today they feel angry, tomorrow they feel sad, the next day they feel like, okay, well, I'm still going to go hang out with my friends, life moves on. And that, we experience something different moment to moment sometimes, certainly within a day, and then certainly from day to day. And so just kind of being a safe place for them to express these things, whatever is there, whatever comes up. And then that kind of goes along with answering questions honestly. Sometimes, maybe the person who died, it was under really challenging circumstances, like with suicide or, overdose. These are kind of stigmatized deaths in our society still. But answering questions honestly, even if the person had a health condition, maybe that was ongoing, you can find age-appropriate ways to share that information with the child. And I think one of the best things we can do is to tell the child, I don't know. If it's really something, what was mom thinking when she, went on the drive that day or whatever. I don't know. I wish I knew. I wish that was an answer I could give you. But when you answer honestly, when there is something you don't know, the teen is going to accept that as like, okay, well, this is still a safe person to talk to. I do know that there are situations and circumstances where it may not be wise or helpful to tell, especially like a younger teen, maybe every detail of maybe a situation that happened. But I think we can still find ways to answer honestly. And I think a good piece of advice I got down the road was to only answer the question that was asked. So we tend to give these long explanations. You hear me talking, I'm long-winded. But to really focus on what is this person asking, and like kind of what's the most direct and basic response I can give. Now, that being said, your teen better than I do. And the relationship that you two have. So you can kind of take that with a grain of salt and answer, the questions as deeply as is appropriate in your situation. But again, just focusing on honesty. Having patience with teens. This is kind of goes back to that one a couple above, that it is normal for teens to have a wide range of emotions. I think the really tricky part here is that if you are also a person who has experienced the same loss, like if it was a family member or a friend, somebody that you guys all knew, you're grieving too. And so you do need to extend yourself some grace that, you might not be in your best parenting or caregiving form when you are also grieving this loss. So not only having patience with the teens, but also having patience and grace with yourself. But just knowing that that is normal for them to not only be having these developmentally normal outbursts and wide range of emotions, but also that it's, again, intensified by the loss. and that it's a difficult, challenging part of the grieving process, but it is normal. And along the same lines, modeling appropriate grief expressions and ways to care for yourself. I'm sure many of you have heard the example of, if you're ever in an emergency, to put on your own oxygen mask first. And I think that that's, very wise advice in these circumstances where you are like having these stressful situations, and especially when you're grieving. So are you finding safe people to talk to? Maybe a friend or, a relative, a therapist, a grief counselor. Are you doing those things you need to care for yourself? And also, it says model appropriate grief expressions. And that kind of takes us back to that word of mourning. So are you finding outlets to mourn? That could be going to visit the grave site if the person was buried. It could be having pictures of the person in the house, sharing memories of them, sharing even like, wow, I'm really missing dad today, and so just kind of modeling those ways of expressing the grief. And then the ways to care for yourself, like I said, having those trusted people that you can talk to, and that you can, have those safe people to share your really tough feelings with. And maybe that's joining a support group or, like I said, going to see a therapist, but whatever that is finding those ways to care for yourself. Maybe it's having 10 minutes at the end of the day to have some quiet time where, you don't have any kids interrupting or whatever. And that's modeling a way to care for yourself. You need 10 minutes to yourself to write in your journal or do some meditating or whatever it is, listening to music, something where you can model that kind of decompressing. Providing choices. Again, this is something that is helpful for kids and teens. And I think especially for teens, when we're talking about this kind of they're seeking independence, and as part of that normal developmental process, that we want to provide them choices whenever possible. And they can be really basic, like, do you want hamburgers or hot dogs for dinner? Or, do you want to go to grandma's house on, Saturday when I have to work? Or do you want to go to your friend's house? Like, they don't have to be life-altering decisions, but kind of just including the teen in some of those decision-making opportunities. And then this one is assisting teens in making connections with support systems. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. So asking open-ended questions. This goes back to creating that safe space for the teen to come to you. And just you're creating the space for them to come. So it might be that every time they say nothing, fine, but then that one time they come and they're like, hey, what did dad mean when he said this? Or tell me, what did the doctor say? Why did this happen this way? So you're kind of creating the space so that when the teen is ready, they know that you're welcoming of their questions. And then seek professional help when needed. And again, this goes back, especially if the teen is expressing thoughts of suicide or self-harm. We absolutely want to seek them professional help immediately. But this could also be a teen who's really struggling to get back into doing those things of daily life. They're having trouble in school. They're having trouble with their friendships. They're sleeping all day. They aren't eating. And kind of some of those tasks that are necessary for functioning. Now, not to say that those things won't be hard. That is a normal part of grief. And especially kind of in early grief, we see that in all ages, these kind of like physiological responses. But if it's been a while and the teen just really isn't kind of getting back into things, then it may be that more help is needed. Okay, so I said about support systems, and I said earlier that support systems are one of the primary indicators of a person's kind of ability to cope well. And the reason is because we all need help when we are in these really stressful situations, and especially when maybe a person isn't there, right, who is part of this family unit. So I love this diagram. So you'll see in the middle it says me. So imagine yourself. And then these concentric circles are kind of these different layers of places where we can access support systems. I use this image with my teens when I do groups in schools through our Kids Helping Kids program. I show them this model and then I give them a blank one and they, fill it in. And it always interests me because, we all are from different systems of support. So some people, some teens, are able to find at least one person that they can think of in each of these categories. Some people, though, they stop at family and friends. And for I had a girl one time, she wrote 3 names down in that family and friends. That was it. That was her whole support system that she felt she had. So I think this is helpful in 2 ways. One is for kind of evaluating that. Where does the teen see their support system? Who are those people? Do they feel like they have an extensive support system, or do they feel very kind of closed off and they only have a few people? And then the other thing is to kind of help spur their thinking and to kind of expand what does it mean to receive support? Who are these people? Where do I find them? And you, as the supportive caregiver, whether you are a parent, a relative, a school social worker, whatever your role is in this child's life, to help them kind of think outside the box a little bit and see some of these different realms that they can receive support. So you'll see family and friends. That one's pretty straightforward. Neighbors, community, and established support groups. So maybe they do join our teen support group or something. Maybe there are people in their community, maybe somebody at school. I think community includes our schools, who they can talk to, who can be a supportive person. Maybe it's their school counselor. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's their coach, whoever that person is. And then we have organizations and institutions. This is if you belong to a church, if you are part of the Scouts, it could be a wide variety, but thinking kind of those structured organizations. And then of course, health and social care professionals would be their doctor, their therapist, those people who are kind of in the caring, helping professions. So kind of using this as the model, then you can help the teens see there are actually all these people who support you and care about you. And if that's not the case, then how can we seek out those relationships? How can we get the teen connected to people kind of in all of these different realms? Maybe it means talking to somebody at the school and letting them know what's going on. I find that it is fairly common that the parents don't tell, or the caregiver, the teen, whoever, don't tell the school that this loss has occurred. And so you're kind of missing one of these whole circles of support that the teen could be accessing. Now, it doesn't mean that the teen is going to want to necessarily have one-on-one meetings with the school counselor every week or something, but just knowing that that person is there, they've been identified as a supportive person. So if the teen is having an especially bad day, or maybe they are finally feeling like they are ready to start talking about this, they know who that person is they can go to. And then the last thing I want to talk about is continuing bonds. And this is ways we continue the relationship with the person who has died. Historically, we had this mindset, and I say we kind of as a culture, that the best thing to do when a person died was kind of to shut the door on that relationship, that they were there, now they're not, and we're kind of moving on. We're moving away from that person. And while there is some value in, acknowledging that that person has died, that person is no longer physically here, that is an important part of the grieving process. The relationship, though, does continue, and it can continue through memories. It can continue through the person's legacy. What are we bringing with them, with us, that was kind of a part of them, whether it's a personality trait or an interest that they had, a team they supported, but that it's good and helpful and loving to continue that relationship just in this different form. I think the thing that is tricky is that it can be hard to both acknowledge the person has died and find ways to kind of carry them with you. So I like this phrase. It's by another grief expert, Dr. Kenneth Doka. He calls it a bond, not a chain. So it's something that keeps you connected to the person and keeps the relationship going, but it's not a chain that's holding you back from moving forward in your life. And so I think that distinction is an important one, that it's a link, it's a bond, but it's not holding you back from life moving forward. And so some of the ways that we can do this is by, finding things that maybe the teen has in common with their loved one who passed away. Like I said, maybe it's a hobby that they had. I worked with a young man who was in one of my school teen groups, and he and his dad loved going fishing together. So that was something that he continued to do, kind of to keep this connection with his dad. And it was something he also enjoyed. So finding things like that. Maybe there's a sort of like legacy, like maybe the person who died from like Alzheimer's disease. And so maybe you join the Alzheimer's Association and raise money for research. That's a way to continue that legacy, to continue that love and support. And now you're kind of, in honor of my grandfather, I'm going to do this walk every year so that other families, don't have to go through what we went through. But I think this is a good way for families to keep the conversation going about the person who died, because it can be kind of tricky. You don't always necessarily have to talk about the feelings, but you can share memories, and you can say like, hey, I know you always loved this sweatshirt that dad had. Do you want to keep it? And so kind of having even some of those physical, tangible things, a special hat, an object that belonged to them, that they valued, kind of some of those sentimental things can be really helpful in maintaining those bonds, and those bonds then helping the person to move forward, because they're not leaving the loved one behind. They're finding this way to carry them with them. I'm not going to read all these, but I just wanted to acknowledge that it exists. This is the Teen Bill of Rights created by the Dougy Center. And that's who I mentioned earlier, has some great tip sheets. They have activities, but their teens who participate in their grief programming, they're out in Portland, Oregon. But they created this Teen Bill of Rights. And I love sharing this because I do think that it's important to acknowledge teens are in a really tricky phase of life, because they're not adults, right? They don't have all the rights and privileges of an adult. But they're also not kids. They're not little. They have their own independent thoughts and feelings and actions and things that they want to do and achieve. So I do think it's important to remember that when we're working with teens, that it's okay and right for them to be included in some of these conversations, for them to know how the person died, for them to have their own thoughts and feelings and beliefs about the person who died and about the way they died, about how the funeral went, like whatever it is, that it's okay for them to kind of experience this in their own way. So you can find this on their website, but I just wanted to kind of put it out there. And then, like I said, I do have a few book recommendations. I talked about all these in my previous series in detail, but I just wanted to put them out here again, because these ones in particular, I think when we are talking about working with teens, I think one of the best things we can do is to understand better where they're coming from. And that's why I love these first three books in particular. Are written kind of from the perspective of a grieving child, a grieving teen. All the Blues in the Sky has some just exceptional ways of talking about the grief journey. It's also written in a really accessible way. Like you could easily read it in a couple days or less, if you're an avid reader and have the time. But I do think it's helpful to kind of get the perspective of a teen griever from these books. World Made of Glass is I think helpful because, number one, it explores a lot of feelings of anger and kind of how to channel that anger. But it also talks a lot about the teen's life before the death, and kind of when her dad is dying, kind of going through the dying process, some of her thoughts and fears about like visiting him, some of her regrets, and just kind of explores a lot of those things that I think are helpful of kind of putting you in the mindset of what a teen might be thinking. And then Dancing at the Pity Party is written from the perspective, this is a nonfiction graphic novel. I don't know what you call a graphic novel that's nonfiction, I guess that. But it's written by Tyler Fetter, and she is writing as an adult, but looking back to when her mom went through cancer and then ended up passing away when Tyler was like at the end of her teens. I think she had already gone off to college. But it talks about like her experience, but also how her experience was different than like her siblings and her dad, and kind of their whole grieving process, and then kind of the things that she experienced. So I think that's a helpful perspective as well. And then the grieving brain, again, when we're talking about, like, I think caring for yourself and understanding your own grief journey is helpful in working with a grieving teen in your life. So the grieving brain is kind of what it talks about. It talks about the neurological changes that happen when you are grieving, when you love somebody and they die. And this Mary Frances O'Connor is a neuropsychologist, and she has done a lot of these studies. And so this book is kind of the culmination of some of her work. But it also has her own grief experiences and kind of why she wanted to do this work, to understand her own grief experience. And then understanding your grief, I mentioned earlier, this is the book we use for our book study that we do. You're certainly welcome to join that book study. It'll be coming up here in a few weeks if you'd like to join. We offer it a couple times a year. So if you miss this one, that's okay. You can join the next time. But this book, I think, is helpful, again, when you are looking at your own grief journey, to see what's normal, what's expected. What are you maybe, what are some things that would be helpful in your own grief journey? And then understanding that helps you to be kind of more understanding of the grief journey of those around you. So I am pretty much anything by Alan Wolfelt. You can't go wrong. And he does have a lot of books that are specifically about specific types of loss, and then also specific relationships of loss. So like loss of your spouse, loss due to suicide, those types of things. And then just some helpful websites. You see the Dougie Center there, which I've referenced a couple times. What's Your Grief has some great articles. They also have a YouTube page that has some great like webinars that they've done in the past. It's a really good resource. And then obviously, if your teen is having a mental health crisis, you have those 2 emergency numbers there, 988, and then the RACSB emergency line. Okay. And then lastly, I just want to say that we have some teen grief workshops that we're doing this summer. The first one, unfortunately, was yesterday. So you missed that one. But later in the summer, we have some more. They have kind of different themes for each one. The best thing to do is just to reach out to me. You see my contact information at the bottom, and I can give you the details and send you the link to apply. All of our services are offered at no cost, but we do require registration for everything, just so we can make sure it's the right fit for whoever, whether it's a child, teen, or adult, wanting to join some of our programming. Just want to make sure that it's the right type of service for you and your situation. And these ones are offered in collaboration with Fredericksburg Parks and Rec. So they are at some of the local parks or community centers in the Fredericksburg area. That is all. Any questions?
All right. Please feel free, if you have questions, to drop them in the comments, and I will give them to Mary. I have also dropped in the comments the link to the Dougie Center and Mary's email that you can contact her at. Again, thank you again, Mary, for the very appreciative presentation that is on a subject that is very important, but unfortunately often does not get talked about. Again, Mary will be doing another 2 sessions. Her next one will be on July 14th at 10 a.m. and it will be about volunteering with Hospice. And as always, if you can't join us live, they will be on our website and our YouTube page for you to view later. So if anyone has any questions, once again, please drop them in the comments. If not, we will see you next month on the 14th on our next presentation.
Thank you, Jody.
All right. It does not look like there's any comments. Again, if you have one and you're watching this later, you can contact Mary at her email, or if you post it in the chat here, we will get the question to Mary. All right. Thank you for once again, Mary, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.